As long as humans have been able to tell stories, we've fantasized about tales of escape, escaping from our bleak lives to a world of wonder, escaping from dire situations, and most prominently, breaking free from imprisonment or restraint, whether it be metaphorically or physically. Classic novels like The Count of Monte Cristo have been written, critically acclaimed television shows like Prison Break have been binged, and films like The Shawshank Redemption, Escape from Alcatraz, and The Great Escape have taken the Academy by storm. We've been fascinated by the prison escape forever. Why? Is it the adrenaline rush from witnessing someone escape from an inescapable fortress? Getting personally invested in the heartbreaking tale of someone's tragic life and seeing them escape despair? Or is it that, subconsciously, we understand the flawed idea of the prison? To understand the idea of the prison and the fascination behind its escape, we must go back to its creation, ancient Greece. The word prison comes from the Latin word prehensionum, which means a seizing of a person from their family, a seizing of a person's wealth and finances, and ultimately, a seizing of a person's time to be free. Throughout history, modern imprisonment has taken two approaches, the retributive approach and the utilitarian approach. The philosophical approach to prison through retribution believes that punishment is not evil. The justification behind this idea is that the approach views punishment as a tool to balance a wrong. This view believes that by agreeing to be a part of a society, the individual has signed a social contract. The social contract is the idea that the individual sacrifices some of their freedoms to be allowed to participate in a community, an idea pushed by famous Western philosophers such as John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau's justification for the social contract is that what man loses by the social contract is his natural liberty and an unlimited right to everything he tries to get and succeeds in getting. What he gains is civil liberty and the proprietorship of all he possesses. Through this agreement, they have given up a part of their freedom as individuals for the protection of the community. The belief advocates that society has the right to punish an individual, and to do anything other than to punish a human for their wrongs is to treat them as less than equal. This view believes that correctional treatment does not respect the individual's ability to make the right choices, and must be controlled or changed to fit society's requirements. The utilitarian view believes that punishment is evil, but can be outweighed if the result has greater benefits. Jeremy Bentham, an advocate for utilitarianism, believed that punishment should be used to deter an individual from committing crime. If the punishment successfully prevents individuals from committing acts that are against the law, then the utilitarian perspective approves. Plato, an ancient Greek philosopher, said that punishment cures a moral ill in the soul of the wrongdoer. To summarize, the retributive rationale believes punishment is not evil and is a part of the social contract. Punishment should be used to balance a wrong, and corrective punishment treats individuals as less than equal. The utilitarian rationale believes that punishment is evil, but if the benefits of punishment outweigh the negative effects, then it is justified. The original prison was very different than the modern prisons of today. In ancient Greece, prisons originally served the purpose of imprisoning individuals who were not able to pay the fees for their crimes. When impoverished Athenians could not pay their fines, time limits were set on their detention to deter indefinite periods of imprisonment. In Athens, most punishments and executions were not carried out in the first place, because it was the norm for the individual to flee the city. Even convicted murderers who were being held in prison while they awaited execution were expected to make a jailbreak and flee the land, said Plato. Ancient Rome was one of the first civilizations to use the prison as a form of punishment rather than detention awaiting punishment. The most notable Roman prison in their history was the Mamertine prison, which was created in 640 BC by Ancus Marcius. Prisoners were not held in the Mamertine prison for very long. Most prisoners either starved to death or were executed quite quickly. The prison is a modern concept. Throughout history, it was much easier to just kill, mutilate, or exile the wrongdoer than to pay to keep the individual housed, guarded, and fed. The prison boom started in the late 1700s in England. Killing and mutilating citizens was becoming increasingly frowned upon, and England could no longer exile prisoners to America due to the Revolution. Jeremy Bentham wanted to revolutionize and reform prisons. He introduced new designs for prisons. The panopticon design was a large circle that allowed the guards to observe every prisoner at once. Bentham believed this could make prisoners behave all the time because they would not know when they were being watched. The evolution of the panopticon design was the radial design, which is what is normally seen in prison design today. For the last 100 years, tensions have been high between the Irish Republicans and the English. This time in history has been called the Troubles. It ultimately culminated in 1998 with the Omagh bombing, which caused the deaths of 29 civilians. Other important events throughout the Troubles' history were events such as Bloody Sunday, which occurred on January 31st, 1972, where 15,000 Northern Irish citizens gathered to protest against policies implemented in their communities by the British government. The British Army was deployed to halt the protesters, and ultimately led to the deaths of 14 civilians. The 1970s and early 1980s were riddled with acts of terrorism committed by the Irish Republican groups such as the IRA. There were shootings of civilians, car bombs, events such as Bloody Friday, and even Lord Louis Mountbatten, a cousin of the Queen, was killed by an IRA bomb. Emotions were running high in Ireland and England at the time, and these insane IRA terrorists were the ones being placed in prisons such as the HM prison maze, also known as the Long Kesh. Her Majesty's prison maze was deemed the most secure penitentiary in all of Europe. The prison was located inside a detention center, which was located inside an army camp. Each block of the 8-block prison was separated into 4 wings, which, in reality, were their own self-contained prisons. These wings were specifically dedicated to IRA members and other citizens charged with terrorist offenses. Surrounding the entire prison was a 15-foot fence. Each block was surrounded by a 5.5-meter concrete wall. All of the gates and entrances were built from solid steel, and everything was operated by electronics. 2 main groups were housed inside the prison, the IRA and the INLA. These members did not see themselves as average prisoners. In their eyes, they were prisoners of war and believed they had to escape. They staged many riots and protests against the prison. They would not wear their prison uniforms and chose to wear their bedsheets instead. When their demand to not wear prisoner uniforms was denied, they staged a dirty protest, where they would cover the walls and the entire prison with their excrement. The prisoners would communicate with the party members outside the prison. The prisoners told the outside members to assassinate specific prison officers. During the 5 years that the IRA staged protests in the prison, 19 officers were killed outside the prison walls. Finally, in 1981, a hunger strike would begin, which led to the deaths of 10 prisoners. They had begun to understand that their efforts inside the prison were ineffective, and they had to escape. What happened next began the plot to undermine the British government, and would become the largest mass breakout in the history of the United Kingdom. Larry Marley, an IRA member, was chosen to lead and plan the escape. He had escaped from a courthouse in 1975 with 9 other men, and had almost escaped from the Maze prison in 1978 while dressed as a prison warden. With his obvious knack for escape, he was chosen as the one to plan it. Other important members and planners of the escape were Bobby Story, Gary Kelly, and Brendan McFarlane. Each block in the prison had an escape officer who was selected by the prisoners. In charge of learning the layout of the prison were the intelligence officers. Nobody was told anything other than what they needed to know. Only a select few knew the entire plan. The first priority of the wannabe escapees was to understand the prison and its structure. When moved to the prison by the prison officers, they were transported in blacked-out vans or through areas with a very limited view of the jail. To understand their surroundings, prisoners had friends, family, and members on the outside world sneak aerial photographs of the prison to the prisoners. The prisoners knew that they would have to get closer and more friendly with the prison officers for their plan to work. They needed to know more about the ins and outs of the prison, and the only way to do that was to get more comfortable with the guards. They started treating the prison officers with respect and would call them by their first names. Eventually, some of the prisoners were given cleaning duties so they could sneak around the prison's inner core and learn more about their strange environment. The prisoners working as orderlies eventually got into the control room of H7 block, where they could learn information about the ins and outs of the prison block. They learned about secret passages, unlocked doors, and broken electronics inside the prison. The IRA prisoners had to create detailed diagrams and plans to gain approval from the members on the outside. They needed the approval and resources of the outside members to help with their escape. The plan was approved, and slowly supplies trickled into the prison. 6 handguns were smuggled into the prison by the IRA. The prisoners wanted guns because they needed the prison guards to immediately surrender. Their investigation of the prison was successful. The prisoners found a way out. The prison food truck was their way to freedom. The truck traveled to every block of the prison, but also outside the maze. The truck was also not searched, and it was allowed to freely pass through the prison gates. After months of research and planning, figuring out how to deactivate the alarms when the food truck arrived and left, and having gained an understanding of the routines of the prison guards, the plan was ready. On the night of September 25th, 1983, the escape began. The escape was to be enacted on Sunday. On Sundays, the prison was basically closed. There was no visitation, no sports, and no other activities.
It is a closed day. There's no visits, there's no movement inside the prison other than food lorries up and down or somebody going to hospital. There's no workshops, there's no football, there's nothing. Sunday is just, you observe Sunday like a religious day almost, even inside prison. Therefore, they do not also need the same amount of staff as they would on a normal working day.
The first step was to take the uniforms and names of 12 officers. They needed uniforms to mask their identities during the escape. The second step was to launch Operation Bumper, which once it was alarmed, enacted a 90-second plan to capture 4 officers. They wanted to portray the IRA in a positive light. They did not want to kill any prison officers. Bobby Story and another prisoner entered the room with the 4 prison guards and held them at gunpoint. The prison officers surrendered, and Operation Bumper was a success. But there were still 17 officers around H Block that needed to be dealt with, almost simultaneously. The biggest hurdle that the prisoners had to overcome was Prison Officer John Adam, who supervised the control room. Gary Kelly was tasked with taking Adams down and succeeded. He held him at gunpoint through the metal bars of Adams' office and made him dismiss any distress calls from the outside sources. However, a problematic surprise arose when a prison officer came out of the bathroom. This distraction caused Adams to attempt to sound the alarm, but before he could do it, Kelly shot 2 bullets, one hitting Adams right above the eye. Miraculously, Adams lived and was only rendered unconscious by the shot. All officers who were captured were led to the classroom, tied up, and stripped of their prison officer uniforms. The escape had begun at 2:30, and 20 minutes later, the entirety of H7 block was controlled by the IRA prisoners. 30 minutes later, at 3:10, David McLaughlin, the delivery driver, arrived at H7 block. He was essential for the escape because the prison officers recognized his face. They loaded 37 prisoners into the back of the truck and made their way towards the exit of the prison. The next step of their plan was to gain control of the control room at the main gate. The plan was that a number of prisoners would stay back to fend off the prison officers while the rest escaped. 12 prisoners disguised as officers went into the control room. However, a few of the prison officers recognized the prisoners' faces. The prisoners were also delayed, which led to a shift change when they reached the main control room. The recognition, paired with the number of prison officers, led to a brawl. The main gate was opening, but the prison officers blocked the food truck from escaping. All of the prisoners escaped the food truck and began fighting the officers who had escaped from the restraints. During the brawl, 5 officers were stabbed. Some prisoners climbed over the final gate, while others shot at the prison officers to fend them off. 1 officer was shot in the leg. At 4:18, the escape was over. 3 prisoners had been captured, while 35 had managed to escape the prison. This event marked the largest prison escape in British and Irish history. 20 prison officers were injured. 13 were kicked or beaten, 4 were stabbed, and 2 were shot. James Ferris suffered a heart attack after being stabbed and died. Of the 35 prisoners that escaped, 15 were recaptured on the same day. The prisoners had split into 3 teams. One team had to hide under the floorboards of a house for 2 weeks, where they had to lay down the whole time. One escapee had drowned while fleeing through a river. A few years later, Mays Prison closed its doors after the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. 428 prisoners were released. The prisoners of the 1983 Mays prison escape all possessed adequate mens rea for the crime of escaping from prison and the assault of the prison officers. They all made the conscious decision to attempt to escape from the prison while knowing the consequences. Each prisoner also possessed actus reus, because they all committed the offense of escaping from the prison. The IRA members on the outside were the accomplices of the IRA prison escapees. Technically, David McLaughlin, the truck driver, could be considered an accomplice. However, he helped them commit the crime against his will, so he is non-culpable, which means he's not responsible and not guilty of the crime. The escapees and the IRA members outside the prison aided and abetted the prisoners because they gave maps to the prisoners and resources to escape. The crimes of assault and escaping from prison are both serious, indictable offenses rather than summary offenses. Both crimes carry federal punishment and are viewed very seriously by the justice community. The prison escapees are the perpetrators of indictable offenses, those being prison escape and assault. Other charges relate against the prisoners who were caught. Some escapees were tried for murder for the death of James Ferris. The allegations against the 16 prisoners for murder were proven false, and they were acquitted of murder charges. However, they were all still indicted for assault and sent back to the Mays prison with extended prison sentences. For many escapees, no one received due process, because they had either escaped or been killed after their escapes. The ones who were captured weren't given more jail time, but were simply locked back up in the maze. 2 masterminds of the escape, Paul Kane and Dermot Finucane, were arrested by British authorities in March 1990, but the Supreme Court of Ireland in Dublin blocked the imprisonment of the 2 in Britain because they would be probable targets for ill treatment by prison staff in Britain. Many other escapees were not as lucky. Many of those escapees who chose to go to America were eventually extradited back to Ireland or Britain. In most countries around the world, the punishment for escaping from prison is 5 to 10 years added on to the original sentence. In Germany and Mexico, there is no punishment for attempting or successfully accomplishing a prison escape. Even in countries that consider prison escape to be illegal, there have been events where prisoners can or have been found not guilty of punishment. A common example of where prisoners are allowed to try to escape from prison is when there is certain danger, like a fire, flood, or other impending doom. In the 1976 case of People v. Leverkamp, Marcia Leverkamp and Linda Wenatchee decided to escape their imprisonment. They were harassed by a group of prisoners and told that the prison officers would not protect them, so they made a break for it. They were soon captured, tried, and convicted of breaking out. They appealed the decision on the grounds of necessity. They had no choice because the other prisoners were going to hurt them. The courts agreed with the grounds that Leverkamp and Wenatchee argued upon, and the courts overturned the original decision to punish them. The court wrote, "We may assume that a prisoner with his back to the wall, facing a gang of fellow inmates approaching him with drawn knives or making it very clear that they intend to kill him, might be expected to go over the wall rather than remain and be a martyr to the principle of prison discipline." So there are justifiable reasons to escape from prison, or at least attempt to. Did the IRA prisoners who believed themselves to be prisoners of war fit the criteria of necessity? Statista found that 4,000 US prisoners died last year due to murder, assault, sickness, and suicide. Do the obscene prison conditions around the world today not justify the necessity for escape? How should society view prison escapees? Should we view them as evildoers trying to get away scot-free from their crimes? Or should we view escaping from imprisonment as human nature and within our natural rights? The experiences of being a victim of captivity can shape themselves in a variety of counterintuitive ways, those being cognitive, emotional, and behavioral consequences. It is a psychological instinct and to be expected of a captive to try to escape captivity or their imprisonment. A common dynamic used by the public to villainize escapees and prisoners is the approach of blaming the victim. It is used to lessen empathy and detract from the individual's standpoint. It is easy to blame a wrongdoer for a crime they committed because they put themselves in that situation. They must deal with the consequences. But in reality, so many other factors shape and affect an individual's life. The blaming the victim dynamic has been proven in most cases to be an illusion that an outsider creates both situations to protect their own personal safety, because it seizes the responsibility of society and the systems in place and places it on the victim. Incarceration causes lasting damage to mental health. It may trigger and worsen symptoms of mental illness, and it can remain present in an individual's mental health long after they leave prison. The toll on the individual's mental health comes from factors such as family disconnection. Prison separates people from society, their community, and most importantly, their loved ones. In 2018, the researchers at the University of Georgia studied 214 state prisons and found the prisoners incarcerated more than 50 miles from their homes and families were more likely to experience depression. Loss of autonomy and lack of purpose. Prisoners lose all control of their lives while incarcerated. This can lead to feelings of helplessness and dependence. The lack of a stimulating environment, paired with the lack of meaning in their lives, causes extreme stress, anger, and frustration in inmates. Overcrowding. The overcrowding present in prisons was found to be directly related to prison suicide, as found in a 2005 study. If we connect back to what we know about the origins of prisons, we know they weren't created to house people for life sentences. They were merely used as detention facilities until prisoners could pay their fines, and those are the most extreme scenarios. For many, being charged with a crime did not mean lifelong incarceration, but exile from the community. So how should we examine the incarcerated? Ultimately, we shouldn't. People in their lives are much more serious than deserving of punishment or not deserving of punishment. Each prisoner and each sentence comes with a lifelong history that has affected the way they've acted, thought, and felt emotionally. Are our systems of punishment outdated? Should we continue to operate systems of incarceration that resemble the practices of humans thousands of years ago? The IRA escapees from the Maze prison are still around today. They pulled off the largest prison escape since the World Wars and will always be remembered as those who broke out of what was thought a fortress. Thank you.